Well, tonight, as I said earlier, we've heard an incredible word from Pastor Michael Evans. Thank you for that message, brother. And we're grateful for his giftedness. Lots of folks are here with us tonight. I don't know if we've introduced Brother J.P. Thompson, who is the pastor over at Mount Olive Baptist. J.P., bless you. Thank you for being here tonight. We love your church. We love you guys. And hope Pastor Robinson's doing okay. And we love him, and we appreciate him, and thank you for the role that you play in our community also. Well, tonight we have a distinguished panel who's going to lead us in a discussion as we talked about this topic, working across racial and ethnic lines. And one of the things that I do love about Arlington is that we do that well in Arlington. And I'm grateful for that. I love the community leaders that we have here in Arlington. We have some of them here tonight, and we have several here on the platform. David Mosser is going to be our moderator tonight. David is right here to my left. He's the senior pastor at the First United Methodist Church, just up the street here in downtown Arlington. And David's a good friend of mine, and I appreciate his leadership. He teaches over at SMU as well, and he has also been the editor of the preaching manual, I believe, that a lot of our Methodist brothers and sisters use, and so he's well known in that community, and he's a good friend of ours. So, David, welcome tonight for playing this role. I appreciate it, and thank you for our friendship. And then just to my left is Michael Glaspie. Michael is on staff at Mount Olive Baptist Church. He serves in the religious education ministry there, and has just been an incredible leader here in our faith community at that church. Another good friend of mine, and we've worked on several projects together, working on one right now, as a matter of fact. And he's just been a really good friend to me the whole time I've been in Arlington. He's served on our school board here in our community, but now he's also serving on the city council. So Michael has somewhat of a unique perspective, both from the faith community as well as serving on our city council. So Michael, welcome to First Baptist Arlington, and we're glad you're here tonight. Bless you. Okay. And then just here to my right is Andy Mangum. Andy is the senior pastor at the First Christian Church here in Arlington, and also a real good friend of mine. Whenever Mosser, when the number of us pastors get together to have a meeting, we always feel like there should be at least one Christian present. So we always ask Andy to come, and he kind of represents that perspective for us. So, and he's doing that again tonight. So, Andy, thank you for being the Christian who's here on the panel, and we appreciate it. But Andy was reared as a Baptist, so we actually sent him as a missionary into the Christian denomination, and I think he's done a wonderful job there in these last few years that I've known him, at least. Andy works also in our community. Many of you who participate in our Martin Luther King services every year, he's one of the folks who helps really organize that, oversee it. He and David and I are the Arlington Ministerial Alliance, so such as it is. This is who we are. But Andy's a real good friend, and I appreciate him and his ministry here in our community. And he always challenges us to be ecumenically minded, and that's one of his strengths, is bringing people together from various backgrounds. And so, Andy, I appreciate that about you, and love you, and thanks for being here tonight. And then a newer friend to me, but not a newer friend to Arlington, is Marcelo Cavazos. Marcelo's here to my far right, and Marcelo is playing a strategic role in our community right now, one of our most strategic roles. He brings his unique background and perspective as he's made his way from South Texas now to North Texas. He's served here in our community at the Arlington Independent School District, and now he's playing the incredibly challenging role of our acting superintendent. And Marcelo, I would just say from my perspective and from the many folks that I know in this community, you're doing a splendid job at that, and we're grateful that you could be here and spend this time with us tonight. He and I have had conversation as well about what it means to work across the incredibly diverse opportunities we have in the Arlington Independent School District. I think it's about 60,000 students, is that right? 64,000 students that he helps to oversee, and all of the schools that we have here that reflect the diversity that Michael has just talked about. So, Marcelo, welcome, First Baptist. Thank you, and we're praying for you in your journey right now. So, God bless you. So, Dr. Mosser, we'll turn things over to you, okay?
Okay.
Is that all right?
I'm
Blessings.
ready.
Welcome.
Ready to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's say thank you to our panel. Can we do that?
I'm not sure that you appreciate this or not, but I'm so glad to have a little debate going on tonight where there's no election involved. So I want to lay out just quick ground rules for us so we understand where we're going. We want to try to be done by 8:15 because we know that Dr. Gregory has a word for us, just like Michael did, and so we're certainly looking forward to that. And in the panel discussion, what I'm going to do is pose a few questions to each of these gentlemen. We probably will not have time for questions because we want to be done by 8:15. That's my target. And if you're disappointed by not asking, being able to ask questions, then what I would suggest that you do is become friends with Dennis Wiles, and maybe he'll put you on the next panel that comes along. So I'm going to start in sort of, I do things in kind of a random way, and so I don't see any reason to change. That would be too organized. So I want to ask Dr. Cavazos first question. And if you don't understand the question, then I'll try to repeat it. But this is the question.
That sounds good to you.
As I understand its early functions, the public schools were charged to fill pupils' minds with knowledge and how to function in a social role. So knowledge and socialization. Obviously, the social function for our culture is paramount. What are your ideas about knowledge and socializing students?
Absolutely. Well, thank you once again for the invitation and for welcoming me here. I think that those two things are interconnected, both the knowledge and the social function of a school system for students. Primarily, it's to make sure students attain their education, right? And that's our primary function, is the mission of the school district is for students to graduate from high school. To do that, and pardon my voice, I've got severe allergy here, but to do that, we have to make sure we have a strong instructional program for students so they can obtain the knowledge necessary to graduate from high school. But we know that that doesn't work in isolation. It can't work in isolation because our school system, when you think of the future of our community or the future of our state or our nation, our world, the future is in our school. And the future rests within those 64,000 students for Arlington as an example. And so to ignore or not consider the social part of that, I think would be a severe mistake. Number one, you can't ignore it because we live in a social system. The students come to school in what's a social system of a school system. And so when they interact with each other, it's very important that there's a high degree of respect. And much of the things that we've mentioned, that have been mentioned already, respect for each other and the background that the students bring to the school. And in that respect is the knowledge of the teachers and the administrators and the adults, if you will, in the building, of accepting those differences that come into the building and maintaining an environment that is conducive to that learning. And so the social aspect is really important. And so what we design in terms of a school system and the progression of students in their education has to do with order and systems that are based on trust and respect and allowance for some growth and development of students. Those things don't just happen. It takes individuals, teachers, et cetera, to be well trained to respond to the needs of students, but also to know when to allow students to flourish on their own. So a big design currently in our school district is to allow students to own their own learning. And so students are more responsible for the things that they're learning in a very responsible way. And I'll just touch on one brief segment of that, and that is for students to be able to bring some mobile devices and bring some of that social networking that we sometimes want to stay completely away into the school. Because the way the students function at home and in their community is at a highly accelerated pace of interaction. And when they come into our school system, it slows down for them. And when it slows down to that level, then that's where you have some problems with the social integration of students. So that's just one small effort that we're doing in terms of trying to reach and make sure that we use tools that the students are using, but in a productive and functional way. So our primary focus is to graduate students from high school, bottom line, and make them college and career ready. But you can't ignore the social function, and that's where we, and I've said this often, we can't do this work alone. If we think as a school system that we can graduate students successfully and make them productive citizens by ourselves, we're mistaken. That's not the way the world works. We're interdependent with the community, with the parents, with the faith-based organizations, interdependent in making this and making sure students are successful at the end of their public education journey. So it takes a community, and those two things are interrelated.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Andy, I'm going to ask you a question now. Churches both promote discord and seek to curtail it, depending on what kind of church it is. In your estimation, how can synagogues, mosques, and churches become communities of peace rather than citadels of hate and violence? And I bring this up in the context of dealing with some threat of Westover Church in Topeka, Kansas, and some of those kinds of things that that people embrace their beliefs to such an extent that a lot of innocent people get dragged into things that they have nothing to do with. So my question is, how can churches, synagogues, and mosques sort of forge a peace in our communities?
Thanks. And I would express my thanks to Dennis to be here as well, and to First Baptist for hosting us. To pick up on the last part of your question, I think that one of the dangers of a Westover church for the rest of us is that we can so easily vilify how egregious they are, that we don't do the inward watch to say there are things that we are guilty of and things that we need to repent of. And so I think that's the first part, is to realize that, as Isaiah did, that we are people of unclean lips and we live among a people of unclean lips, and to make that confession of faith whenever we're engaged in anything, whether we're talking about sexism or racism or friction between socio and economic groups, that in each of those cases, you talk about owning a church's story. We have to be willing to own the part of our story, particularly for us as Anglo churches, that says, we were racist, right? That we did things and continue to live out of those systems. And so I think that's the first part. It's the humility to confess collectively our sin. I also think, too, it's about learning to respect your own faith tradition in a way that offers it as a gift to the world, as opposed to using it as a blunt object against the world. This year, our high school camp in our area was focused on interfaith dialogue. And so there was a speaker from Hindu faith, Muslim faith, and Jewish faith as a part of our high school camp. And one of the messages that didn't get conveyed well enough was that as Christians, they had just heard from very knowledgeable, affable, friendly, reconciling people who were deeply rooted in their own faith tradition. And that they as Christians have to be as deeply rooted in their own Christian identity to be a healthy, faithful partner in a pluralistic culture. So there isn't a distinction, I think, between being rooted in your Christian faith and being engaged in a pluralistic culture. The deeper you go into a knowledge of Jesus Christ, the more aware you are at how accessible he was to all. And as you deepen that relationship through spiritual discipline and through study, the more you can live out that path. And so, to me, it comes down to Christian churches become agents of peace. Synagogues, have to do that through their own narrative, and mosques have to do it through their own narrative. But as Christians, I think it is through taking the mind of Christ and recognizing that that is an accessible, yet rooted person in their own faith.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like for each one of you to be able, as we wrap up in a little bit, to sort of summarize what you've heard the other speakers say, so we can come to some perhaps kind of convergence. Michael, my friend, I wasn't totally responsible for you getting elected, but I didn't hurt you any. What's changed in your leadership role, broadly understood? Because you've been in a lot of different leadership roles in Arlington for really a long time for such a young man as yourself. And so what would you say has changed for you in terms of your broad perspective or King context, to put it in another way, since we got you elected?
First of all, I want to echo my panel brethren and thank First Baptist for putting this together, Dr. Wiles for putting this together, Baylor for helping drive this. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to sit together to discuss kind of where we are and things that we need to be seriously looking at. As to the question you asked, I'll primarily use when I was on the school board and then now as a city councilman. When I was on the school board, because every home in Arlington did not have students in the school district, there was more focus on making sure that we addressed the needs of those homes that had schools and that we would interact with them and also use the community as a whole as a backdrop to make sure we were headed in the right direction. Whereas on the city council, every home is impacted by what you do, the decisions we make. And in terms of where I see us and the direction we should be going, when I was running for city council, I had an opportunity to sit down with some young students from University of Texas at Arlington, African American students, and they were asking me about why I was running. And during the course of our discussion, something dawned on me that hopefully is applicable. If you look at sort of historically where we've come in our racial relationships, I looked at my dad and his generation and how hard they worked to put us in a position where we could approach the door. Then the generation I've been a part of has helped so that we can open the door and go in. I was telling them their generation would be responsible for helping rearrange the furniture. Because what happens now, we've gotten to the point where we sit down together, but as Dr. Evans was sharing with us, we still tend to look at things solely from our perspective instead of taking under consideration we need to move and come with a consensus of where we all are and how it should look so that we all are comfortable with it. And I think that's part of what I should be doing and the rest of the council members should be doing, understanding where we are and what we can do to get closer and closer to having that room reflect everybody's attitudes and positions.
Thank you. One of the things that Dr. Evans reminded me about was kind of an old caricature of someone saying, "Your end of the lifeboat is sinking," as if that wouldn't affect the other end of the lifeboat. And I think what's really important for us to all understand is that we really are kind of in this thing together, and so that's why it's so important. So in my church at First Methodist, there's a bulletin board that the history committee puts up about once every year, and it's got pictures of all the living and deceased people in Arlington that have schools named after them. And when I walk by that board, it just amazes me about how deeply entrenched in the school system my people have been for 70 years. And so, Dr. Cavazos, what I would like to ask you is simply this. We have a generation of people now that are parents that in many cases never received much parenting. And so to watch them parent their own children using the models that were used upon them, it's just kind of scary to me in a way. I mean, I'm not a good parent according to my co-parent, but hey, it's just one person's opinion. But I know that I do better than many. And so I guess my question would be, as you sit at the top of the educational heap right now, what do you and your vice principals and administrators in the school system, what specifically are you trying to figure out what to do with parenting skills? Because it almost seems like you could have schools set up with really two generations going at the same time, and it wouldn't hurt anybody.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I can speak a lot of detail on that, but I won't. We have a strategic plan
You're
that
chosen to
is
speak.
focused on the parent engagement. And I'll just give you some insight as to the accelerated work that needs to be done in the form of parent engagement and parent education. You're right. There's oftentimes a disconnect with the way parents interact with the school or don't interact with the school. And we know that in order for students to be successful, their parents need to be engaged with the school. So previous thinking could be, in terms of school settings, that parents come to volunteer and help the school. Current thinking and the transformation we're trying to do here in Arlington as part of our strategic plan is that parents come to our schools to get the tools to help their children meet learning objectives. So that the parents, whatever background or economic condition, et cetera, come to the school. And a major component of that is to get the tools necessary to help their children be successful. Literacy tools, math, social, discipline, things that we know make students successful. And so when you think about that, it's really flipping some of that whole notion of parent involvement. And then the other part of that that's equally significant is reaching the parents at home, through social network, through the internet, through non-traditional times. If we think that the only time we can affect parents are within the school hours, we're going to miss a whole large group of parents. And so the thinking in our school district is to change that model and really push the parent engagement and parent training out to the parents in their own social setting, in their own community, in their homes, through the internet, and through social networking. We ask parents, and I ask focus groups of parents from all backgrounds, what's the best way to communicate with you? And these are parents that different mobility levels and et cetera. Email and text. Doesn't matter who you ask. Everybody has some kind of social device or mobile device. And so changing some of that structure where we are more intentional about what we're doing with parent engagement is a big strategy for us. And we know that it will yield rewards because as the parents get better equipped to help their kids meet learning objectives, the better the students will do. One more point with that. So sometimes when I say that and when we talk about that, the immediate picture that comes to mind is only some parents would benefit from that. And really, as you've been in our schools and you get more experience with our school system, all parents would benefit from that. I'll give you an example. When a student becomes a freshman in high school, doesn't matter what economic background the parent has or the family, et cetera. If they don't understand the credit structure or what an AP class is or what an IB program is or what a college scholarship or how you do the application for college admissions, that cuts across all economic type of systems. Those are tools that I'm talking about for parents and engaging the parents so that they can help their students be successful. That's the one huge area. The other, and I won't be as detailed on the other one, but the other one is to make sure our system, our school system, is responsive to parents, that we treat them well, with respect, that we reach out to them and we genuinely accept where they're coming from and welcome them into our school. The schools, and I've said this often, I've said it publicly, the schools belong to the students and the parents. They don't belong to us. That's why we have a school system. That's why we exist. That's why we're employed, is to serve the students. So if we have that service attitude and service-minded, then we reach the parents when they come, but we also transform our engagement so that we make the most of it and help their children meet learning objectives. And we have huge initiatives for that, and we're accelerating that in our district.
Thank you. Reverend Mangum, our title for tonight is Working Across Ethnic and Racial Lines. You've been very instrumental in the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration over the year. And what I'd like to ask you is, what have you learned from being one of the central characters in that with respect to working across racial and ethnic lines?
Yeah, one, I would probably not call myself central. I enjoy the partnership.
I did that.
Yeah. But there are people in the room who are central to that, and I am privileged to walk alongside them. But one is not so much something that I knew or learned differently, but I have seen the way bright, intelligent people have struggled with it. And that is that Dr. King's vision was not exclusive to an African-American context. He was an African-American pastor, but his vision included me. His vision included the whole of the nation, and that was a competing understanding of justice as it comes to terms with racial needs, ethnicity in America, that too often he's only talked about in February, when really he is one of, if not the most important American theologian, certainly of the 20th century, I would go as far as to say, the most important American theologian of the 20th century, if not our whole history. And his vision was a Christ vision of one, a unity and crossing those boundaries. And so what we have seen in the committee work is people really working at expressing that. I think one of the most impressive things has been the way TCC has worked at that, of doing a multicultural festival where people's ethnicities are lifted up. We get to eat food from various Asian countries and various South American, Central American countries and European countries. And there's this explosion of vibrance that happens as people, they spread out through the halls of TCC. And so it's very much of a town hall or town square feeling as people greet one another and interact with each other, but then also engage in this experience. But what I see there is like I said, scholars or students, school agencies, the city, and the church is really trying to reflect the whole of our community rather than just a white-black dichotomy and how that works together. Because that wasn't King's vision, although it gets framed that way too often, and that's certainly not where we're living now in Arlington. And so I'm just, like I said, I'm thrilled to walk alongside the folks that I walk alongside in the committee and on the board of directors, because that's what they're working at, and they're very intentional about expressing the whole of that vision and not just the part.
In my philosophy class, every semester we read Dr. King's letter to Birmingham jail, and I'm always amazed about how my students who are from Ellis County typically warm to that and just say, we didn't know, we knew that he was a great leader and we knew this and we knew that, they didn't realize that he had a very keen mind and was a wonderful writer. And so we use that every semester, and it's a good thing. So I thank you for that. Let me ask you this question, Reverend Gillespie. Dr. Evans has talked about, how the church needs to take care and not be splintered into a lot of different groups. I'm going to ask you, how do you think that churches themselves can kind of foster this community spirit? We've talked about how the schools do that, and obviously since the schools touch so many different students, but in a church, we may deal with many people that are kind of leaders in their own constituency. So the work that we do, I think, is really important. So how do we keep from breaking into, racial or ethnic enclaves?
I think, first of all, we have to acknowledge the fact that we have, I guess, different tastes. So we go to a church because we feel comfortable in that particular environment. So I don't think there's really anything. First of all, there's nothing wrong with that. And I'm not sure that there's a whole lot of impact that we can have on that. However, things such as this, an opportunity for us to do things beyond the walls of our normal church activities that give us an opportunity to interact with each other and really get to know the other person versus standing off to the side and assuming the biases that we've had over the years are legitimate. And as far as the pastors and the church leaders, I think it's imperative that they model wanting to get out, get involved, and get to know people. One of the challenges to me is we tend to define diversity in terms of being in the same room. But just because we're in the same room, that doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot. We really need to understand each other, care about each other. The Bible tells us that when a brother or sister hurts, we should be hurting as well. So we really need to reach out to one another and make sure that we hear them where they are versus where we perceive them to be.
One of the things that I think is a big irony about the culture in which we live is that the people that seem to work across ethnic and racial lines tend to do so best in criminal enterprises. Where there's money to be made illegally, no one really cares who you are, just so you can produce.
That's right.
And I'm not suggesting that that's a model that we should emulate. I'm just saying that the interest, perhaps self-interest of something like that motivates people to do something that we ought to be doing because we love Jesus Christ. So, Dr. Cavazos, would you say a final word to us? And then Andy, would you? And then Michael, would you?
I think that based on what we've heard earlier and just kind of the discussion here, I can summarize just this from the school's perspective or my perspective. The two things that are critical in order to ensure that we have success, I think, in our community, our state, our nation. And that is how we educate our young people and how well we do that job is going to be key to our future. There's just no question about it. The past shows that, the world shows that, and we should embrace that. So how we educate, how well we educate our young people is critical to the future of our nation and our world. Equally, though, is how we interact with each other and how we work on this work, which is working across all racial and ethnic lines. That is equally as important because as we struggle sometimes in our public education, where there's splintering and efforts to perhaps not keep that public education system the way it is, and send money somewhere else or things like that, in an effort to continue to divide that, I think we should be cautious of that, because how well we educate our young people is key to our future. How well we work together to do that work is also equally as important. And so as we had about 3,500 new kindergarten students come into our system this year. 3,500, just brand new kindergarten students with the hopes and aspirations of the world and to be successful. And as they progress through our system, it's our responsibility as a community, not just the school, to make sure that they're successful. And part of that success is how we, the adults, work together and how we interact together and how we come together on these important topics such as education or working in different settings. So I think from that perspective, those two things are critical to our future and our success.
It seems to me that, as I listen to you, Dr. Cavazos, and I watch the audience, there's a lot of energy in the room around questions dealing with real human needs, raising children, educating children. Dr. Evans talked about responding to issues of poverty. And I think that when I think about what I heard growing up about Southern Baptist missionaries, the thing I remember hearing about was that they were agricultural missionaries, going to places and helping people raise crops, or they were medical missionaries, going into places and providing medical care. And it was in the context of serving real human needs that they had the door open to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I think that as this conversation needs to get framed in the future, it needs to be about that. How do we as the church cooperate together, because we are missionaries in the 21st century in America? How do we cooperate? How do we identify ways that we can be helpful in meeting real human needs, whether it's helping people be better parents, helping keep families intact, helping people move out of poverty? What are those real human needs that we can partner together? And I think you're absolutely right. As the kids see adults, it's hard to put together worship services, even within my congregation, which is predominantly one ethnicity, that satisfy everybody's needs. But it really is pretty easy to put a garden in and say, let's work to provide food that's accessible to a community. And I think the more we learn to partner together. On the mission field, they'll tell you they don't really care much whether you're Baptist or Methodist or Disciple. They cooperate together because when you're out there, you got no one else to depend on. And I think that's where we're at now, is that we're on the mission field. And I hope that as we reframe the question, it becomes more about the kind of questions you're addressing and asking and helping us to think through.
I would say sitting in a room by yourself, isolated, you operate in a very, very small world. The more you get out, the larger your world expands. Councilwoman Wildman and I, a couple of weeks ago, and Dr. Cavazos had a chance to go over to Egg Roll Festival, Vietnamese. It was an enlightening and enjoyable experience. But we tend to just isolate ourselves over those things that we're comfortable with. But we weren't brought here to be comfortable. We were brought here to grow, learn, and be involved with each other. So let us continue doing that.
Thank you, panel. It's interesting. I was sitting here listening and thinking about my own life and just these folks who are here in front of us, the leadership they're giving our community. My daughter is 25 years old, and she married a young Hispanic guy from our community, and he has 2 children. And the birth mother of the 2 children, she's African American. And so my family has taken on a new complexion. And what's interesting to me is, as I looked at this panel, I listened to you, what you guys had to say, is I now have in my home, as part of my family, African American and Hispanic connections. And my two new little my wife who's here tonight, and my mom, Cindy and I, when my daughter got married, we were double promoted as grandparents. So, we kind of were on the fast track of learning what it means to be grandparents. And we love our two little grandsons. And they are now both in public school. They are first grade and kindergartners at Foster Elementary. So I have an incredibly renewed interest in how good a job we do with first graders and kindergartners, and how well accepted they are, knowing that their ethnicity plays a certain role in their perspective in life. I'm also concerned about their education, and I'm concerned about the spiritual community that they're going to be reared in, and the spiritual environment that we have around us. And so as I look at the people on this panel and those that are here tonight, I'm grateful for people like Michael Glaspie, who's been a role model for so long. And I think it's important that someone from the faith community feels led to serve as Michael does. And Michael, you have no idea how many young children look up to you as someone who has proven that you can be a success in two different worlds. And so we applaud that, and we pray for you, and we're grateful for what you do. And I would say the same thing to you, Marcelo. Now that I am much more connected to the Hispanic community than I was at one time in my life, I look at someone like you, and I've heard your story. You've been to my office, and I'll tell you about Marcelo. He came to my office one day and just said, as I'm trying to lead this school district, he said, I need help, and I'm coming to ask for help. And what do you think, as a pastor, as a leader in this community, what do you think should be taking place in our schools? And how should they be shaped by the community? And I would just say, as one person, that's the kind of person I would want to be the superintendent of the schools in Arlington, Texas. And so, Marcelo, bless you. And I don't have as much good to say about the other two guys.
We really have run out of time.
But yeah, we need to go. But I know that, Andy, you may not be a central character in what you're doing, but you are a character. I do know that about you. And Mosser has already proven who he is. So, but I will tell you this, to pastor in this town and to have friends like David and Andy, JP, who's here tonight, I'm blessed. And I'm grateful for you guys. Thank you all for the roles you play in leading our faith community. Okay, and thank you for being here tonight. All right, we're going to take just a quick break, more refreshments if you want them, and we'll get back together here in just a minute and hear from Dr. Gregory.